Linda Carter lived in a quiet suburb near Seattle, where mornings felt calm and nights felt long, and after years of emotional struggle she had finally started to rebuild her life. She worked part-time at a local library where she enjoyed the silence and the steady routine, and most people saw her as a calm, polite woman who kept her life simple. But inside she still carried memories of loneliness that she never fully talked about. Then she met Daniel Carter, a Canadian contractor who came to the city for a long construction project. He was different from the people she had known before, steady in his words, respectful in his actions, and emotionally grounded in a way that made her feel safe again. Their connection grew slowly through small conversations, shared coffee breaks, and long talks about life goals, and within a year they decided to marry, believing they had both found a second chance at happiness. But Daniel was not alone when he came into her life. He had a son named Ethan Carter, a 19-year-old young man who had just finished high school and was still figuring out who he was supposed to be. Ethan moved in with them after the marriage, and from the very first day, Linda noticed how quiet he was, not rude, not friendly, just distant, as if he was observing everything without wanting to be part of it. He would stay in his room for hours, only coming out for meals or small necessities. And even then he rarely spoke unless spoken to. Linda tried not to take it personally. She told herself he just needed time. She cooked meals he might like, kept the house clean and peaceful, and asked simple questions about his interests. But Ethan always responded with short answers and quickly returned to his silence. Daniel noticed the distance too, but believed it was normal for a teenager adjusting to a new home and a new family structure. Life continued like this for months, slow and quiet, with Linda trying to build warmth in a house that still felt emotionally cold. Then one morning Daniel received an unexpected work assignment that required him to travel to another city for 2 weeks. It was not unusual for him. His job often took him away, but this time felt different because the timing was sudden. He left early in the morning, kissed Linda goodbye at the door, and told Ethan to look after things at home and to support Linda while he was away. Ethan nodded without much emotion, and Daniel drove off, leaving behind a house that suddenly felt larger and quieter. The first day after Daniel left felt normal enough. Linda followed her usual routine, went to work, came home, cooked dinner, and watched television alone. But by the second day, she started noticing small changes in the atmosphere. Ethan was no longer staying locked in his room all the time. Instead he began appearing in shared spaces more often, sometimes sitting in the living room even when Linda was there. Not speaking much but not leaving either. At first she thought it was a positive change. Maybe he was starting to feel more comfortable. She even felt relieved, believing the family was slowly adjusting. But then small details began to make her uneasy. The way Ethan sometimes looked at her when she was not paying attention, not in an obvious way but in a thoughtful lingering glance that disappeared quickly when noticed. The way he suddenly started offering help with chores like cleaning dishes or fixing small things around the house, always staying a little longer than necessary, and the strange silence that would fall between them even when they were in the same room. Linda began to feel a quiet tension she could not explain, not fear exactly but confusion, like something unspoken was forming beneath normal life. Then came the evening that changed everything slightly. It was raining softly outside, the kind of rain that makes everything feel slower and heavier. Linda was in her bedroom reading when she heard a knock on her door. She paused for a moment, surprised because it was late. When she opened the door she saw Ethan standing there, his expression different from usual, more serious and uncertain, almost like he had been standing there for a long time before knocking. He hesitated before speaking and said he needed to talk, something important. His voice was quiet but tense. Linda immediately felt a shift in her stomach, because something in his tone told her this was not a casual conversation. She stepped aside and let him in, and as he walked into the room he did not sit down right away. Instead he stood near the window looking out at the rain as if trying to gather his thoughts. The silence between them felt heavier than usual, and Linda suddenly realized that whatever was about to be said might change the way she understood the entire household. because until that moment she had believed the biggest challenge in her life was adjusting to a new marriage and becoming a stepmother. But as Ethan finally turned toward her, she understood that something far more complicated had already begun quietly unfolding inside her home. Something that could not be ignored anymore, and she had no idea yet how deeply it would affect every relationship in her life. After Ethan entered Linda's room that rainy night, the air felt heavy and different, as if the house itself had become quieter to listen. He stood near the window for a long moment without speaking, watching the rain slide down the glass like it carried his thoughts away. Linda stayed still, unsure whether to sit or stay standing, because something about Ethan's silence felt serious, not childish or casual. After a while he finally spoke in a low voice, saying he had been feeling strange for a long time, not just since the marriage, but even before that. He said life had always felt empty in a way he could not explain, like he was watching other people live but never fully part of it. Linda listened carefully, trying to understand. But she also felt a growing unease because this was not a normal conversation between a stepmother and a stepson. Ethan continued speaking in broken thoughts, saying that since moving into the new home something inside him had started changing, emotions he could not name, confusion he could not control, and a strong sense of isolation even when people were around. Linda gently interrupted him and told him that what he was feeling might be pressure, stress, or just adjustment to a new family life. She tried to keep her tone calm and motherly, but Ethan shook his head slowly as if he had already thought about all those explanations and rejected them. He said it was deeper than stress, something that felt personal and difficult to understand. The room stayed silent again, only the sound of rain outside filling the gap. After that night Ethan did not say much more, but the energy between them changed in small noticeable ways. He avoided eye contact for longer periods, sometimes leaving a room quickly when Linda entered, and sometimes staying too close for a moment before stepping away again. It created a strange emotional distance that neither of them openly addressed. Linda began to feel uneasy in her own home, not because of danger but because of emotional confusion she could not define. She tried to stay normal, focusing on cooking, cleaning, and work, but her thoughts kept returning to Ethan's words, wondering what he truly meant and whether she had misunderstood something. Days passed like this, each one feeling slightly more tense than the last. Then one afternoon she noticed Ethan sitting alone in the kitchen long after breakfast, staring at his hands as if lost in thought. When she asked if he was okay he hesitated before answering, saying he felt like he did not belong anywhere, not even in his own family. Those words stayed with Linda longer than she expected, because they sounded like pain rather than confusion. She sat across from him and spoke gently, telling him that everyone feels lost sometimes and that things would become clearer with time. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, trying to reassure him, but the moment felt fragile, as if one wrong word could break something unspoken between them. Ethan did not move away immediately, but he also did not respond. He simply nodded slightly and left the room, leaving Linda alone with a growing sense that something emotional was developing in ways she could not fully understand. Later that same evening, Linda received a message from Daniel saying his work schedule had changed and he would return home earlier than expected. She read the message twice, feeling a strange tightness in her chest that she could not explain. It should have made her happy, but instead it created anxiety, because she sensed that the timing was important in a way she could not yet understand. She looked around the house and noticed how silent everything felt. Ethan had gone quiet again, staying in his room without coming out. The house felt divided into separate emotional spaces, each person carrying thoughts they did not share. As the night came closer, Linda tried to prepare dinner as usual, but her mind kept drifting. She felt like she was standing in the middle of something unfinished, something that had started without clear words, and now could not be stopped easily. Ethan did not appear for dinner that night, which was unusual but not questioned. The silence between them had already become a pattern. Later, while cleaning the kitchen, Linda paused for a moment and looked at the empty hallway, feeling a strange sense that everything was waiting for a change. And deep down she knew that Daniel's return would bring that change whether she was ready or not, because the emotional distance in the house was no longer small or invisible, it had grown into something real, something that would soon force every hidden feeling and unspoken truth into the open. And as she turned off the kitchen light that night, she had no idea that the next day would completely shift the direction of her life and expose emotions she never thought existed inside her family. When Daniel Carter finally returned home earlier than expected, the entire house felt like it stopped breathing for a moment. Linda stood in the kitchen trying to act normal while preparing a small meal, but her hands were unsteady and her thoughts were scattered. She kept glancing at the clock and listening for footsteps that would signal his arrival. Upstairs, Ethan stayed in his room with the door closed, avoiding everyone as if he was preparing for something difficult. When Daniel walked through the front door, he looked tired from travel, but still smiled with relief, happy to be back in his home. He placed his bag down and immediately hugged Linda, but even in that simple moment he sensed something was wrong. The house did not feel warm like before. There was a silence that felt unusual. He asked where Ethan was, and Linda hesitated for just a second too long before answering. Daniel noticed that hesitation and his expression slowly changed, not angry yet, but alert, like a man realizing something important was being hidden from him. That evening passed in quiet tension. Daniel tried to talk normally, asking about daily life, work, and home routines, but Linda's answers were short and careful. Ethan did not come down for dinner, which made the silence even heavier. Later that night, Daniel went upstairs and knocked on Ethan's door, but there was no answer, only silence from inside. He tried again gently, asking him to come out, but still nothing. Linda stood at the bottom of the stairs listening, feeling her heart race because she knew this moment was going to change everything. The next morning Ethan finally came out, but his face looked exhausted and emotionally distant. He avoided eye contact with Daniel and barely spoke. Daniel tried to engage him in conversation, but Ethan's responses were short and distant, creating a growing emotional gap that Daniel could clearly feel. By afternoon the tension reached a breaking point. Daniel asked to speak with Linda privately in the kitchen, his voice calm but firm, asking her if something had happened while he was away. Linda tried to explain that nothing specific happened, but her voice lacked confidence, and Daniel could sense that she was holding back emotions. The atmosphere grew heavier as both of them realized that avoidance was no longer possible. Later that evening the truth began to surface in fragments, not through shouting but through painful honesty. Ethan finally spoke to Daniel in a quiet voice, saying he had been struggling emotionally for a long time, feeling disconnected from himself and uncertain about his place in the family. He admitted that during Daniel's absence he had gone through intense inner confusion that he did not fully understand. Daniel listened in silence, his expression tightening as he tried to process what he was hearing. Linda stepped in carefully, explaining that she had tried to support Ethan and guide him through his emotional state, but she also admitted that the situation had become more complicated than she expected. The conversation was difficult, filled with pauses and broken sentences, but it was not about anger. It was about misunderstanding and emotional distance that had quietly grown inside the household. Daniel eventually sat down, overwhelmed not by betrayal in a dramatic sense, but by the realization that communication in his family had broken down without anyone noticing early enough. Ethan's voice shook as he said he felt like he did not belong anywhere, and that moving into a new environment had intensified feelings he could not control or explain. He said he needed space to figure out who he was without pressure. Daniel did not interrupt, but his silence carried disappointment mixed with concern. Linda felt caught between both of them, trying to hold the situation together but realizing that emotional wounds cannot be fixed quickly. After a long conversation that stretched late into the night, it became clear that the only solution was distance and time. Ethan made the decision to leave early for college, hoping a new environment would help him find stability and clarity. Daniel accepted this with a heavy heart, understanding that forcing him to stay would only make things worse. Over the next few days the house slowly settled into a quiet routine again, but it was not the same kind of quiet as before. It felt emptier, more aware, more thoughtful. Daniel and Linda continued living together, but there was a visible change in their communication. They were polite, caring, but emotionally cautious, as if both were afraid of reopening conversations that might lead to pain. Ethan left a few days later with a small suitcase and few words, saying goodbye in a simple and respectful way, avoiding long emotional expressions because everything had already been said in fragments. After he left, Linda stood by the window for a long time watching the empty street, remembering how quickly emotions had changed inside the house without anyone intending harm. Daniel joined her quietly and stood beside her without speaking, both of them understanding that family bonds do not break suddenly. They weaken slowly through silence, misunderstanding, and unspoken feelings. In the weeks that followed, life continued but felt different, not broken completely but changed in a way that could not be reversed. Linda often reflected on how easily emotions can grow in unexpected directions when people fail to communicate openly. And Daniel focused on rebuilding stability step by step, but deep inside both of them knew that the experience had left a permanent mark on their relationship, not as betrayal in the dramatic sense, but as a reminder that even strong families can quietly drift apart when feelings are left unspoken for too long.